And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Excuse me. And in this fourth segment, I'm going to talk about the sort of importance of depth in the NBA, especially right now, sort of given the new CBA rules on the luxury tax and how much teams can afford to pay their players going into future NBA seasons. So this obviously was sort of inspired by, the Knicks and just how much depth their roster has, as well as the Boston Celtics and how much depth their roster has, and the fact that the Celtics were able to win the championship with that depth. This might be sort of like a trend-setting this might be a trend-setting thing that so many other teams are going to try and do, like acquire all of these competent players in the starting lineup and to sort of have that depth. So we're just going to talk a little bit about that. And so the article, I also have an article pulled up here as well, just talking a little bit about depth and the importance of it. So different lineups and reevaluating the bench has been a huge theme over the past couple of weeks. And an angle that hasn't really been talked about yet is how much depth really matters. So the Knicks rotation has, to compensate the lack of how should I say this? Because I think Jalen Brunson is an A-list star, but a lot of people don't really consider him as, an A-list star. That's what the article is saying. Like, I believe A-list is like superstars, like that kind of stardom, like superstar players that can change the game. And I think Jalen Brunson is one of them, but it's not like, how should I say this? Well, I do think he is one of them in the league. He's not like one of those super, super big names, I guess you could say, that would attract as much attention as somebody like maybe Jokic, maybe LeBron, maybe somebody as big as Steph, maybe somebody like KD or Devin Booker, something like that. And so without having like that definite number one player on your team, you have to have sort of an abundance of role players, which is exactly what the Knicks have. So their depth is very impressive on paper. The Celtics showed that a version of this formula could work even at the highest level, and winning with a depth roster, is that going to be like the way forward? That's sort of like what I'm going to be talking about. I think that's going to be a trend. So, but I also think that there's like a yes it can, and there's also like a no aspect in part of it, because depth is very, very important for the regular season, right? However, when you're going into the postseason, you need that star power. Like, star power really matters in the postseason. So this is exactly why teams, like, they need that sort of star, and you can't sort of win a championship without one. And like, that's why someone like having somebody like Nikola Jokic on your team means that your team is going to dominate whenever he's on the floor, and that just ultimately gives your team more confidence. And not only that, Jokic is one of the players that can actually meet the moments, in the big moments when you need him. He didn't do it in Game 7 this previous season, but you can't be perfect. Nobody is perfect. And the Celtics, they didn't have that same level of player. Like, it's not the same level of player as someone like Jokic, who can change the game and alter the game and control the game the way that he does. But they do have a very, very competent starting lineup. And that's what leads to wins in the postseason when rotations are cut down. Their regular season starters with, Porzingis had a really good net rating of plus 12. That success carried over into the postseason, even when they had to change Kristaps with Al Horford due to his injuries. And having dominant starters as a trend among the having dominant starters is a trend amongst the Celtics, and it's been a trend amongst like the last 5 Celtics championship teams. So each team's starters had a playoff net rating of 10 plus or better. That one exception was in 2020 the Los Angeles Lakers, who had a +5 net rating for their most used starting lineup. But the five-man group they played most, with JaVale McGee in place of Dwight, registered a +17 net rating, and the starting lineup they used in Game 6 had a +44 net rating. Excuse me. So, recent history has sort of showed that it's more important how your best and most used lineups fare in as opposed to the other team's best players. And that isn't to say that the Knicks model isn't going to work, right? Their starting lineup with Hartenstein and Anunoby was impressive last season, so there's reason to believe that they can make it work with Mitchell Robinson and Mikal Bridges. But it is the strength of your starting group that makes the difference in the postseason. So this brings us around to the Cavs. Although there are concerns about the backup big man situation or overall depth, the Cavs will only be as successful as their starting lineup will take them. Last year's starters will likely be the preferred group again for this season. And, as I said before, they're only successful as their starters. Donovan Mitchell wasn't there when Cleveland was playing Boston, and because of that ultimately costed them their season. And on top of that, Darius Garland didn't really play well in the elimination game either. And Jarrett Allen's injury in the postseason as well meant that the starters, like literally not a single one of the starters, or half of the starters, were not even playing in this game. And they posted a net rating of -7.6 in the 4 games that they actually did play together. And the starters with Isaac Okoro in place of Allen didn't really fare much better with a net rating of -5.4. So Cleveland's starting unit was much better in 2023, but still they only managed to get a 3.2 postseason net rating. So that starting lineup that they have is just going to need to get better individually and, playing together better as opposed to just acquiring better pieces, And depth matters much more in the regular season than it does in the postseason. So I feel like that's sort of like when you're asked how important when you're asked the importance of depth, you sort of have to think about the context. And hold on, let me just go ahead and look at. There's somebody in the chat, Anthony Manzano, and he says, with the NBA possibly adding and extending to other cities and they realign the divisions, what team in Texas would make in the East? That's a very, very good question, and one that I didn't really think about. I haven't really, I know the Dallas Cowboys, they are an NFC East team, but I don't really consider that they're not in the East, I don't know why they're an NFC East team, but I digress. Now, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if if Dallas was to go to the Eastern Conference. If there was any team that was to go to the Eastern Conference, it would probably be Dallas. And let me just hold on just 1 second. I just want to go ahead and see where Houston is on Dallas. Not on Dallas, but on Texas, because honestly, I'm not very good at geography, but given the fact that the Dallas Cowboys are in the NFC East, I would put the Mavericks in the NFC East as well. Not in the NFC East, but in the Eastern Conference for the NBA. Now, if Google will actually give me an image. Okay, thank you. You could really it's either between Houston or Dallas, because Houston, you could argue, is much more farther to the east than Dallas, but at the same time, it's they're in the western side of they're in sort of the western hemisphere, not in the western hemisphere, but in the western side of the United States. And Mananzo also had more in the chat. Yeah, I am a Dolphins fan. I understand why we stayed in the AFC East, but geographically we would make more sense in the AFC South, and Indianapolis makes more sense in the East. Yeah, that is true. I do understand that take. I'm not really going to talk much about football because that's just not what I'm supposed to do. We have other football podcasts, so if you are interested in speaking about football towards the other podcasts, I recommend going and checking that out. There's TJ, he does the sports podcast directly after I do my podcast. So if you want to tune into his thoughts, and he's going to be talking about the NFL game that happened recently. If you want to tune into his thoughts, then go right ahead and look at his and watch his live. He's going to go live at I believe at like 2:00. But yeah, I do understand what you're saying about like, the AFC and the way that it's aligned. It's not really like, it seems a little weird, and a lot of the NFL alignments are weird. And another question from Mananzo: did I already preview the Southeastern Division? Yes, and the video is going to be uploaded later today after I finish with the live. So if you're interested in what I had to say, then you can go right ahead and click on the video, or you can rewind. I'm pretty sure you can do that. If that was in the first segment, if you're interested. So anyways, back to what I was saying. Depth is, it's like a yes and a no. You need depth in the regular season, but in the postseason, you need that star power. So it's all about finding a balance of both and how you're able to implement that into winning. And so you can't really get a definitive answer into like how important depth is to a team, right? It depends on the situation and the context. So depending on which team, depth might work for them, but another team, a different type of style might actually work for them. Like maybe like, I mentioned how the Celtics, every single time they've won the championship, they usually have great depth. But the Cavs, when they won their championship, they had the 1-2 punch of LeBron and Kyrie and everybody else that was there. So it is possible to win a championship with depth, and it's also possible to win a championship with star power. Let me rephrase that. It's possible to win the championship with a lot of depth, and it's also possible to win the championship with a lot of star power. Because having depth alone isn't going to take you all the way to the finals. And having star power alone isn't going to take you all the way to the finals. We've seen James Harden have star power alone, didn't take him to the finals. We've seen Kobe have star power alone, didn't take him to the finals. We've seen the Atlanta Hawks in 2015, I believe. They had depth alone, and they got swept in the postseason by the Cavs. So, just a little food for thought. Whenever you're thinking of a team and what they need, you always have to sort of find a right balance between the two. And Monanzo's in the chat again saying, I think Brunson is a star, but I don't think he's a superstar like most New York Knicks fans think he is. See, I disagree with that. I think he is a superstar. I genuinely think that the numbers that he puts up on the offensive side of the ball are superstar caliber numbers. Yes, his defense is a liability, but so is Donovan Mitchell's. And it's like he's got to be in that conversation. Like, what was that stretch that he went on in the postseason? 4 or 5 straight games of 40-plus points? That is superstar talent right there. I'm sorry, that is superstar talent. You cannot tell me that it's not. But I digress. So aside from that, we're done with this 4th segment. So I'm going to hit your questions right after this break. But I'm going to go into the 5th segment where I talk about a player who I feel didn't deserve to win an MVP. And spoiler alert, the year that we're on is 1965. So for any of you guys who know who won the MVP that year, then you know exactly who I'll be talking about. But for those of you who don't know, stay tuned, and I'll reveal that after this short break.